In section 5, we're going to be talking about materials, how we can create them, how we can modify them, and how they can really impact our overall model. So starting out, we're going to be talking about how do you get around the general layout of the material interface. Then we're going to be talking about modifying materials for construction documents. Obviously, what you want your materials to look like in terms of your construction document production is very different from what you want them to look like in terms of a rendering. So we're going to look at how we modify those for construction documents, and then how do we modify them for creating new materials, but also modifying existing ones for renderings. In this video, we're going to talk about an introduction into the material editor, how the material editor is laid out, the general interface of it, how to load additional materials in, because the current template has many materials in it, but that is not the whole of what Revit has to offer as far as their material library. And then we're also going to talk about the properties and options for each material, because each material has many different sort of tabs within the material editor that give you options to really input a lot of information into your materials. So as we move into Revit, before we jump into the actual material editor, a couple things that we'll want to take a look at that really are impacted by our materials and the choices that we make with our materials. So down here, we have the option for visual style. And we're going to go through that real quick. We've mentioned that briefly in the past, but if we come up here and we create a wall, and I'm just going to create a brick on CMU wall. And if I go to my 3D view, and I'm going to go ahead and hide these, that way I can kind of zoom to fit on this wall here. Okay, so visual styles change the appearance of what we're looking at. So right now we're in hidden line view. This is kind of the typical view that you would have for a construction document set. So it's your black and white with your hatches and kind of fill regions and things like that. If we go to our visual styles, we have the option for wireframe. That's kind of your X-ray view. You see through absolutely everything. Your hidden line, like I just mentioned. Then shaded. Shaded takes each material and applies a color to it. It does not necessarily have to correspond to what color the material itself is. But as you can see, this is a red brick, so they've applied just a red color to it. This also tries to approximate some sort of shadow. So the very edge here, they throw into a shadow just to give it some sort of three-dimensionality. Beyond shaded is consistent colors. So consistent colors is basically the shaded option without the shadow. So if I change it to consistent colors, we get rid of that difference in color variation from the very top gray to the side gray there. Then we get into realistic. Realistic is going to take whatever the render appearance image is and just apply that. So we get the actual brick image that we've got here, but it does a decent job of showing you kind of how your materials are laying out, what that's going to look like. And then finally is ray trace. Ray trace is almost like a real-time render. It does its best at approximating light, image, quality, texture, that sort of thing, but it does it in real time. So I wouldn't recommend having this on very often because it is going to take up quite a bit of bandwidth, as well as taking up time, because every time you move, it's going to have to recalculate and figure out what the image looks like. So if I click on ray trace, it's going to go ahead and load this real quick and then give me a general idea of what this looks like rendered. So I'm still within my model. It's not a rendering, but if you'll see, as soon as I go to actually orbit, it's going to go fuzzy, and then it's going to try and recalculate what that looks like. So ray trace is great to see good approximation of a render appearance, but it's not going to be super efficient as far as just working around in the model. So if we go move this back up to hidden line, we'll kind of use this as our default to kind of mess around with some materials and get into the material editor. So up here under manage is our materials option. So if I click that, it's going to open up a dialog box. And on the left-hand side, these are all of the materials that are loaded into this template. So we have a whole bunch of options along the side that are already loaded. Now, these are not the full extent of the library of materials that Revit has to offer. If you want to see additional materials, so right now this wall has this brick common here, this red brick. Maybe we don't want a red brick, we want something else. we can come down here to the bottom and open the asset browser. So the asset browser opens up and there's a whole bunch of different options along the side. The appearance library is probably the one that you're going to be looking at the most. And we can go into masonry and see a whole bunch of options for various bricks that are within the actual Revit library. If I double click on any of these, it'll go ahead and load that in. But you can see there are tons of other materials already built into Revit. Some of them are better than others, but there is a pretty wide variety to get you started just in terms of creating the look that you're after. So as far as the look of a certain fabric or a metal or a paint, there's a lot of options in here that you could probably find something that's relatively close to what you're getting after, but you may need to create your own custom material, which we'll get into here in a little while. So if I close the asset browser, we also have a couple options down here. On far left is creating your own library. So if you want to create your own library of materials, so maybe you've got a certain library that you use for certain types of projects, and you want to just go ahead and load that in so that you have all those as an option here. You can create your own library and then open that library up whenever you're doing that type of project. We also have the create new material option. So, or we can duplicate an existing material. So if you just need to make a small tweak to a material that's already in here, duplicating might be the way to go. If you're trying to create something entirely new, then creating your new material is definitely the option you're looking for. When you hit create new material, it's going to create a default new material, and we can right click on this and do a couple different things. We can rename it, we can delete it, we can duplicate it, and we can edit that material itself, or we can add it to a list of favorites. I would recommend when you're creating your own materials, when you rename your material, always put a dash and a space in front of it, and then title your material. What that's going to do is it's going to sort all of the materials that you've created to the top of the list, and that gives you the ability to find the ones that you've created far easier and much quicker than trying to sort through this big list and try and find the ones that you're after. So moving on from there, whenever we have a material selected, we have a bunch of options over here for that material. So if I go back to my brick common, we'll see I've got a bunch of tabs up here, and this interface over here has to do with whatever material I have selected. So I have the identity data for that material. It's very similar to the identity data that comes in with your components, walls, windows, doors. It has very similar stuff to it that you can plug in for each individual material. We have graphics. The graphics tab is what controls the look of your material when it is in hidden line view, as well as shaded and consistent colors view. So we've got our shading color up here, and then we've got our patterns for our hidden line view, what kind of hatches and patterns we want for the look that we're after. We have appearance. This is the render appearance. So what does the thing look like when it's in the realistic visual style, as well as the ray trace, and then when you actually go in and render a material, what does that look like? Then beyond that, we have the physical and thermal tabs. The two of those are basically tabs that will tell you a whole bunch of properties about that material that are used for analysis models, be that energy analysis, thermal analysis, structural analysis, the type of kind of properties that are built into that material as you build up your model. If this stuff is filled out when you do an analysis model, this is the information that it's going to be pulling from. So that's a quick overview of the material editor and gives you a general idea of kind of where we'll be working and finding different things as we move forward.